Hello, welcome to another edition of the Manchester is Red podcast from the Manchester Evening News. It's been a quiet week for Manchester United, no midweek game this week. It's a quiet one on the podcast too. I'm Tyrone Marshall, stepping in to host this week. Got Samuel Luckhurst with me. Steven Railston is at Chester Races, where I think he's got a couple of rides this afternoon. Rich Fay is off all week, coincidentally in the week that Wrexham are touring the Las Vegas pool parties, so read into that what you will. So it's just me and Samuel. Samuel, how are you?
Yeah, I'm very well, thank you. It would be nicer to be in Las Vegas, but I suppose we've got that to come in with the pre-season tour in July.
We have, yes. We are very much looking forward to capping off that tour in Vegas. What goes in Vegas stays in Vegas, apart from the content that will come on the Manchester Evening News website, obviously. Otherwise, there'd be no point in us going. Yeah, like I say, a quiet week for United. No midweek game. First time since, not counting international breaks, first time since pretty much the World Cup, I think. And back in December, it's been an incredibly relentless season for them. Been a fairly quiet week, but in a way, Samuel, I think it's probably been a good week for them to rest and recuperate. A couple of days off at the start of the week, despite that West Ham defeat. They've looked a little tired recently, so it's arguable that this free week has come at a good time for them.
It is, and there was certainly an upside of going out of the Europa League. If they were still in that, they'd have been. I think they'd have probably been. Would it have been away at Juventus last night? So it would have been more travelling this week after travelling to Brighton and travelling to London last week, and those fixtures took their toll on United. They didn't win either of them. They didn't score in either of them, and I don't think anybody's been looking for excuses for the form recently either. Nobody really expected United to win at Brighton, even though Brighton then got thumped rather remarkably by Everton a few days later. But certainly to have taken nil points from those two games last week was a big underachievement, and it has put the pressure on them coming into this Wolves game. And as I said, there are no excuses going into this, and I'm just hopeful from a journalistic perspective going to the game that we're not in this cycle of writing about something that we've already seen this season or saw last week. It was two identical results last week, and the script felt quite familiar as well, with United very profligate in front of goal and then being punished. And in the case of the West Ham game, there were certain similarities with the mental capitulation at Brentford, and that they didn't really seem to know or have the confidence to get back into the game, even though that goal from Benrahma came before the half-hour mark. And with Wolves, they're mathematically safe now, as is the case and has been the case with so many teams in the past. If you're in that situation where you've essentially nothing to play for other than prize money for the club, your mind is on where you're going on holiday, and if you've not booked a holiday yet, you're probably expending more energy on getting somewhere ideal booked up for 3 weeks' time when the season ends, so you can really savour your vacation and ensure that it's the right place to go to. So United couldn't really ask for better opposition in that sense. It's a home game as well, and I know Wolves are probably where they are. It's a false position, but unfortunately, when you look at United's form against Wolves since they got promoted back to the Premier League in 2018, I think there have been 12 games between the sides. The 8 wins have all been decided by one goal. United, 3 of their wins have come with goals scored in the last 15 minutes of those games. It was a fixture that you couldn't go a month without being a part of or attending, and fortunately it's been a bit more scattered in recent years. But Wolves they're always quite obdurate opponents for United. So although I'm sure there are a lot of United fans who will be walking down to Matt Busby Way tomorrow quite optimistic of winning the game, I don't think there'll be many expecting United to win by a big margin.
Yeah, I mean, we'll come on to a bigger Wolves preview in the final part, but it doesn't feel like it's going to be a free-flowing, free-scoring game. And like you say, the same things that are happening to United kind of week in, week out at the moment, aren't they? And there's forwards out of form, the midfield's not ticking, the goals aren't being scored. Defence has looked not too bad, to be fair, with Shaw and Lindelof, but the same sort of thing is happening week to week. And if this free week needs to prove anything, it's that they can respond and and rediscover their form and kind of settle themselves ahead of that run-in, don't they?
Well, that has to be the objective now. Ten Hag has laid it out for them: 3 wins out of the last 4 league games, and they've qualified for the Champions League. 3 of those 4 games are at home. The away game, although their away record is poor, it's at a team that are pretty much all but certain of being in the Premier League next season, in Bournemouth, and I'm sure Bournemouth will want to go out on a high with it being their last home game. But United can't, just look at their away record and say, well, if we don't win, that's why we've not won. Their away record against the Fodder had actually, and still is by and large, pretty good. It was just the one blemish against bottom 7 teams came last week against West Ham. And as I said, United aren't really seeking excuses, and there's certainly some unhappiness over the Premier League saddling them with a few Thursday, Sunday schedules as well. I think including the Chelsea game, which I was pretty amazed that was given a Thursday night slot, given that United could have played on the Tuesday. Manchester City playing at Brighton on the Wednesday, and of course the rights holders don't want a clash of games, but it did feel a bit odd that United, who play on the Saturday against Bournemouth, have then had a game pushed back by, there's going to be a 5-day gap between those games, so they've gone from having this relentless schedule to possibly willing the days away, given these gaps that are starting to appear between games, which has its benefit. But also Ten Hag has spoken about the benefit of actually playing quite regularly and keeping players on edge, but it does come a point where it takes its toll. That said, I think this season is certain to be the 6th longest in terms of games played for United in their history, and looking at the top 5 seasons, in those seasons combined, they won 11 trophies. If you want to be a successful team, you're going to have to be playing mid-50s, probably early 60s games in a season. And the manager and the coaching staff have got to be able to manage the load on the players. They've also got to be able to trust the players, and that's clearly been an issue with Ten Hag this season. There have been times where he could have rotated, and he hasn't, and I keep on going back to the example of Eriksen getting injured against Reading, which was completely the fault of Andy Carroll. But Eriksen should not have been playing in the second half of an FA Cup tie at home against Championship relegation fodder. When Rafael Varane got injured against Sevilla 4 weeks ago, he should have come off immediately. He shouldn't have been kept on for it felt like another 10 minutes, or best part of 10 minutes, maybe 15 minutes, and then he came off at half time. So there are still things that they can improve, and also with the personnel, clearly there are issues there. Even players who've actually come on and not played an awful lot, but had good impacts when they have had their cameos, like Facundo Pellistri. Clearly Ten Hag doesn't fancy him enough, because he would have played him more often. His only start was away at Real Betis, and that tie was pretty much boxed off at that point with the 4-1 advantage from the first leg. And it is affecting, I think, Ten Hag's in-game management all of a sudden now, because there are players. Christian Eriksen is such an important player for United, and I'd say he's one of maybe 7 players that Ten Hag can completely count on. But it seems like there is this theme with him that he plays an hour and then that's it. He has to come off because he doesn't have the endurance. And that's understandable given what happened in Copenhagen 2 years ago. And I think he's had a pretty good season for United. And when you factor in that he was a free signing as well, he's had a very good season, all things considered. But they do need someone more dynamic there, as we've spoken about in the past, and they don't currently have that player. And it has got to the point now where United have they have been very leggy in the past couple of weeks, and especially in the second half of games. They are missing someone like McTominay even, who, although he's probably the poorest technically of the midfielders that Ten Hag has available, he is clearly one of the fittest players in the squad. And I know there's irony in saying that because he's injured at the moment. And I think he's been injured for about 4 weeks, and United initially didn't expect him to be out for particularly long at all. But you do need that physical robustness at this time of the season, and there are certain players who come to the fore when the schedule is taxing, as was the case 6 years ago with the Europa League. There were certain players that Mourinho was able to turn to and count on because they were fit for the majority of the season. Fellaini, I suppose, is a good example. If you want to, having brought up McTominay's name, not the most technically gifted United player, but he had a very good impact during the run-in. He was available. He scored in the semi-final against Celta Vigo, and he was such an ever-present that he started in the final. And that wasn't a nailed-on selection there at all. So, if you're a squad player, and although you might not have had the most fulfilling season, the chances are that if you are fit and involved enough for the run-in, you could have a fulfilling end to the season. And that's maybe the case with Lindelof at the moment, who's done very well by and large since he came back into the team.
Yes, most definitely. It's award season as well at the moment for footballers. A couple of United players have at least had a good week in terms of trophies. Lisandro Martinez and Christian Eriksen at the Laureus Awards on Monday. Martinez picking up a trophy with Team of the Year for Argentina, winning the World Cup. Eriksen, Comeback of the Year. It's a reminder in a way of what a phenomenal story Christian Eriksen is to even be here and playing so well for United and in line to start a cup final. It's kind of almost forgotten now what he's actually been through and the story that is. So a good reminder of that. In terms of Martinez, Samuel, his absence has gone under the radar in a way. You've just mentioned how well Lindelof's done. Luke Shaw as a left-footed centre-back has been excellent. In a way, in recent weeks, the fact Martinez and Varane are out has been the least of United's issues. But I do think there's an argument there. They're missing Martinez for the quality of his passing as much as his defending. And I think it's been noticeable, especially against West Ham. The build-up play was just so slow. It was dull to watch at times. They couldn't progress the ball. They couldn't sustain any pressure on the West Ham goal. And as strange as it is to say it, they're arguably missing a centre-half with Martinez's passing quality to get that play going through midfield quicker, because it was just at West Ham it was just too predictable and too slow, wasn't it? And when they eventually got the ball forward, West Ham were well set defensively.
As you said, and as I've said time and again this season, Martinez is almost as much of an asset in attack as he is in defence, because his distribution is so good. He breaks the lines, and it's not just that, the speed in which he actually passes the ball as well, it automatically accelerates attacks, and it puts the onus on a midfielder or a forward to quicken the attack even more. So if United are starting off from a pretty quick starting point, that's only going to benefit the team in terms of going forward and trying to get higher up the pitch. Luke Shaw's reading from centre half is excellent at the moment. He is one of the best centre backs in the league. I think you and I have both been quite up close with him in terms of speaking to him in a mix zone, and he's had issues in the past where certainly in his first few years at United he was too juvenile in the way he carried himself, and in a more unpleasant sense he's been frankly fat shamed online by trolls. But when you're up close to him, he is very physical, but you can tell it's all muscle, and so he's not, although he's not particularly an imposing defender, he is physically imposing, and he's nowhere near a pushover at all. So Shaw has done very well, and I think certainly going forward, Ten Hag is always going to want a left-sided centre-back to go with the right-sided centre-back, right-footed, I should say. And initially he went with Maguire and Lindelof because they were the two centre-backs. Then Maguire had his suspension for the Cup semi-final, and from that point forward, and I know Shaw was injured for a little period as well at the start there from the Brentford game, but Shaw hasn't looked back really since he got in the team against Brighton, playing at centre half. And looking ahead to this summer, they will probably be in the same position as they were last year, in that there was a specific requirement for a left-footed centre-back. If one of the reserve centre-backs is to go, and I'm not talking about Tuanzebe or Phil Jones, because it seems almost certain that both of them are going to be released, but obviously Maguire is the prime candidate, then it's advisable for United to go for a left-footer, given the balance of the squad and the needs of the team, and also what the manager prefers. And I think you wrote earlier in the season about United having a short list of five defenders, I think, who are left-footed to come under consideration, and obviously they went with Martinez because that's who the manager wanted, and I remember at the time last summer that the scouts had really pushed for Pau Torres, who had been this player of interest under the previous regime, but obviously they in the end the club overruled the scouts to go with the manager, and that has paid off this season. It'll be interesting to see how Martinez gets on in his second season, but so far he's easily been Ten Hag's best signing in terms of the value and the quality he's brought to that team. But certainly they do need a more direct contingency plan for next season, because as good as Shaw is at centre back, he's also possibly been. It doesn't feel like it's been a particularly vintage season for left backs in the Premier League, and you can make a case he's been the best left back in the Premier League as well. Andy Robertson's form has tailed off. City get by without a left back all these years on. It's remarkable how they can cope without this essential position being filled effectively. Arsenal, I know they play Zinchenko there, who's done pretty well for them, but I still wouldn't say he's quite hit the same heights as Luke Shaw has this season, and he's probably not plumbed the same to similar lows of Shaw either. Shaw's been involved in a couple of atrocious trouncings, but it's testament to his character that he's recovered from the setbacks at Brentford and against Liverpool and gone on pretty good runs of form. With the Brentford one, he was out of the team for a while, but after he got back into the team, he was very good going into the World Cup, and he had a pretty good World Cup as well with England. So defensively, United look, despite although the goal difference table doesn't reflect very well on them, I'd say you've got to pin that far more on the attackers than the defenders, even though there have been some games this season where United have conceded 7, 6 and 4 in 3 separate games.
Absolutely. That is all for part 1 of the Manchester is Red podcast. We'll be back after the break to talk about BART. Ay caramba, Manchester United might be signing a goalkeeper. Samuel, you did the story earlier this week that they are interested in BART VERBRUGGEN. I'll be honest, it's not a name I've come across, but it's not one I'm going to forget either. Now you've brought it to my attention. 20-year-old goalkeeper, so one for the future, we would think. Fill us in basically on what we know for anyone that might not read of the story or wants to hear you talk about it as well.
Yeah, I'd literally never heard of him when his name was mentioned to me. I even had to check. He was the Anderlecht goalkeeper that a source had told me that United are interested in the Anderlecht goalkeeper, and immediately you obviously look at who's been playing for Anderlecht this season, and it was unclear who that goalkeeper was, because looking at their fixtures, it's felt like, certainly up to a point, it was quite even between one goalkeeper and another that was starting the games. I think the other guy was I am definitely Googling his name now, but it was Hendrik van Krombrugge, who is 30. So that would have been I'm sure everyone can remember him from KAS Eupen and St. Truiden as well. It's someone that Louis van Gaal has probably heard of, but he's 30 and he's 30 in Belgium. BART VERBRUGGEN is 20 and Dutch. So even if I didn't see clarity on the name of the goalkeeper, I think I'd have been able to make an educated guess and got it right that it was BART VERBRUGGEN. So it's an interest. I think it's an interesting approach from United, because it's the kind of goalkeeper that you could see them going for in a market where nobody is expecting them to go for an established goalkeeper. And in the case of Verbruggen, he's quite prodigious in that he made his debut under Vincent Kompany, and in Belgium they have this weird playoff system, don't they, to win the title? And I think he played in a playoff against Club Brugge, as Louis van Gaal would call them. Everyone calls them Club Brugge, but that's the appropriate pronunciation apparently. And he made his debut in that 2 years ago, which in Belgium I'm sure would have been pretty eye-catching. Recently he's got some recognition at international level in that he got his first call up to the Netherlands squad for the March internationals. He was on the bench against Gibraltar, so he's on an upward curve at the moment. And as I said, because of Ten Hag's predilection for Dutch players or players who've been educated or come through the Dutch system, it does make sense. The more I just looked into the goalkeeper and what he would mean in terms of United's recruitment strategy, it kind of ticks a lot of boxes there, and they certainly need someone to be a credible competitor with De Gea next season, because as we said, it still feels like a fait accompli that De Gea is going to stay on at United beyond this season, even though United, from what I've been told, that United are pretty much planning to phase him out, which is a strange situation given that technically he is out of contract in about 6 or 7 weeks or something like that. So the logical solution would be just to release him at that point, but it doesn't look like they're going to do that, and they've got a 26-year-old England international still on their books, and they've got Tom Heaton, who's 36 or 37, but unfortunately since he came back to United he's had a couple of injuries that have gone under the radar, and they've kept him out for quite a while, and he's been out for, it feels like, the best part of 2 months now, which is not good timing, because I think that there would be there'd probably be louder calls for him to come in for De Gea if he was available, rather than Jack Butland, even though Butland's a younger goalkeeper. Ultimately with Butland, are you really going to put in someone who's been third choice goalkeeper at Crystal Palace for a few years and is a loanee when you've got an FA Cup final in 3 weeks? Probably not. I think if Butland or Heaton are to have a role in the FA Cup final, it would be coming on with penalties looming, possibly. I think that is something that United have definitely got to give consideration to. I mean, you were saying during the shootout or just before it, we were obviously looking at what United's shootout record was, and I think when Brighton were putting all those penalties past De Gea, you said that De Gea had conceded his last
I think it was 17 in a row in shootouts, yeah, with the Villarreal.
It's probably 21, isn't it, if you include Russia against Spain at the 2018 World Cup. I think they at least scored 4 goals, Russia, maybe 5, but he got a bit of flack. Well, not a bit, he got quite a lot of flack for his porousness in that shootout in Spain, because there were certainly 1 or 2 he should have stopped, and it was no surprise whatsoever that the run of conversions ended with Solly March hitting a conversion in rugby terms and skying his penalty. So the goalkeeping situation at United, it's so weird in that you have got technically 3 goalkeepers out of contract. I mean, should we mention not Nick Pope, Nathan Bishop? Don't know why Nick Pope came to mind there. But Nathan Bishop, who, as I've said before, you've played at Old Trafford as many times, if not more times, than he has in goal, and this is someone that United paid about £1.5 million for to Southend over 3 years ago, and they must have done that knowing that he had no chance whatsoever of playing, and he's had a new contract since then, and I just don't understand that that strategy. I don't see why a youth team goalkeeper can't be the extra goalie in training rather than having to shell out, as I said, £1.5 million. And in terms of the wages he's added on top of that as well, the total investment is probably £2 million. And I'm not saying essentially that is a drop in the ocean for United, but still, why pay the money there? So I look forward to if United do have the gall to announce on their website that Nathan Bishop extends his contract, because I can't imagine that's going to go down too well with the support base. And they've also got to navigate how they go about announcing De Gea's extension, because unfortunately for him, although he's not actually had that bad a season, he has certainly had a bad month.
Bad few weeks, yeah, definitely. And I mean, the goalkeeping situation is interesting. Like you said, they're 7 weeks away from basically all the goalkeepers leaving that have been there this season. They've got Bishop, who's 23. Henderson's coming back. Mate Kovar as well, who's 22, I think, and by all accounts has had a good season on loan at Sparta Prague. I'm not going to pretend I've been watching his games on Wisecout, but the reports seem to have been reasonably good. I mean, the interest in Verbruggen hints at a succession plan at least for De Gea, but we don't know what's going to happen with Tom Heaton and whether he'll stay on. But the idea of having Verbruggen, Kovar at 22, Bishop at 23, Henderson at 26, De Gea, Heaton. I mean, there's some of these goalkeepers have got to go, haven't they? Really, it just seems there's too many there. Kovar and Bishop are clearly not under 21 goalkeepers now. They're either third choice or one of them goes, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, even Kovar, who I suppose if I was to mention his name at a press conference to Ten Hag and Neil, our esteemed colleague, was sat behind me, you'd probably see him saying to a colleague, "Who?" As if say, "Who the hell is that?" Because why would he have heard of Matej Kovar? And I'm not saying everyone should have heard of him either, but I think he first started training. The first time he trained with the first team was about 5 years ago. So he's been known to a lot of United fans for half a decade, which feels pretty crazy, really, because again, I don't think anybody has ever looked at him as someone who has got a realistic chance of ever playing for United. He might have been on the bench once or twice. I mean, I certainly can't recall those games, but he's obviously been the third goalkeeper on match day who's involved in the warm-up, and that's the closest he's got to participating in a game at Old Trafford. But credit to him in that he's gone back to Czech Republic. He's gone to possibly the biggest club in the Czech Republic as well, and he's playing a lot of games. As you said, I mean, I've not seen a single second of what he's been up to out there in for Sparta Prague, but I suppose the fact that he's had some form of international recognition as well is only positive for him. And was it Cheltenham? I think he was due to join earlier last summer, and then that collapsed or something or other. There were a couple of loan deals for keepers. I think Bishop was another one that fell through due to, for whatever reason. And it was only because there was an extension for the transfer window with Czech Republic teams that Kovar was actually able to go out on loan, because the intention was originally for him to go to a Football League club. And I think from memory it was Cheltenham, but in the end it didn't happen, and he's got exposure back in his homeland. And I suppose, given that he's doing well, you would just say that try and get a good price for him. Whether Sparta Prague have the money or not, I don't know, but you'd think that he's turning heads elsewhere across the continent, and where he's so far down the pecking order at United, it's just logical to cash in. I don't think it's a cynical thing to say that they've got to look at the academy as more of a cash cow than they have in recent years. I mean, even in 2016, this is absolute small fry, but they got about £6 million for Paddy McNair, which I thought was really good going, because McNair was never ever good enough to play for United. He only played for United under Louis van Gaal because he was right-footed, and Van Gaal was obsessed about having right-footed, left-footed centre-backs, and United's defence was dreadful, and Chris Smalling and Phil Jones or Johnny Evans, they were so prone to injury that he obviously had to look to the academy, and that's why Tyler Blackett got a look in when he should never have had a look in either. And McNair was actually a midfielder, but Van Gaal made a defender out of him, and in his first couple of games he did pretty well, and the exposure that he had at United turned him from, I don't know, someone who was probably slated to be released at the end of the 2014-15 season to someone who they got £5 or £6 million for. About, I think it was just over a year after he'd signed a contract with United. So they've got to do that more often now, and there are certainly more senior candidates that they could get money for in the summer. I've no idea at this stage the certainty, but Henderson, McTominay, Elanga, they are three players who you could all see being sold, whatever the circumstances, in the summer. And there's money to be made there and to be reinvested into the squad. So that's the ball's in United's court there. But they can't. I think Dishon Bernard, when he last went out on, not last went out on loan, but when he went on loan to Hull last season, he got a new contract, and I think it's quite a long deal as well. And he's a 22-year-old. There has to come a point where you you get money in for these players, and you keep on kicking the can down the road. In the case of Bernard, I think he was injured earlier in the season. That's why his development plateaued and why he had to drop down a league to go to Portsmouth on loan. But you've got to strike while the iron is hot, and the iron wasn't particularly hot with McNair, but he'd been present enough in that squad under Van Gaal that they were able to get money from Sunderland, and they've got to do that with other players as well. And look, Kovar's, it's difficult as a goalkeeper coming through the United Academy to go out there and have a really good career, because it's almost impossible to become the United number one as an academy player. But he's gone back to the Czech Republic and he's getting the exposure that not many might have expected him to get, and now it's time to, as I say, strike while the iron is hot. Look at Henderson. His development was on an upward curve. He went back to United, and that's when the line's starting to flatten.
Absolutely. And talking of loanees and of Sunderland, just got to mention there, a big weekend for Ahmad Championship playoff. First thing against Luton on Saturday. Second leg on Tuesday. Potential Wembley final to come. Another big stage for him. He's had a brilliant season there. He's really benefited from Tony Mowbray. You wonder if that Mowbray replacing Alex Neil might turn out to be a big moment in Ahmad's career and maybe his United journey, because I think he's probably the one manager at Championship level that big clubs want to send their loan players to. He's so good at managing them and getting the best out of them. And Ahmad has been getting better and better. The goal he scored at Preston last weekend was magnificent. He just made it look so easy. He's obviously someone United are going to take a look at in pre-season on the tour of America. It feels now that he's at the stage where he almost needs to be part of the first team squad next season.
If he's not in the United squad next season, he needs to be loaned to a Premier League club, and then at the end of that, you make a decision. It's either he's good enough to be in our Premier League squad, or he's sold, because that will have been 4 years down the line from when they signed him. But I just think it's logical now, given that he's well and truly cut it in the Championship as Sunderland's top scorer, and he's been a pretty good goal scorer, and he's also a scorer of great goals. Where they've not got another left footer in attack other than Anthony, there is still issues with the balance when Anthony's unavailable, because it's a right footer going in there, and United clearly do not want to play that way. They want a right footer on the left, a left footer on the right. And if you've got Anthony and Ahmad, although they're not world-class players, they're nowhere near the level of the left footers in City squad, for instance, but it's a decent base to work from, and they've got time on their side. They can be developed, they can get better. Anthony and Ahmad, how much United invested over £100 million in both of them. Ahmad was not a drop in the ocean at 37 million. I think it was initially 90 million, rising to 37 million. But as I said before, I was told that if he was given a run of 10 games, he could show what he was capable of. He didn't have that at Rangers. That loan didn't go well last season. He has had that at Sunderland, and when he did hit that 10-game mark, he'd scored 4 or 5 goals, I think, by that point already. So that prediction has come off as far as United are concerned. Now there needs to be trust shown from Ten Hag in him, and really, when you look in the squad, a striker's a priority, then it's a midfielder. They're in for a goalkeeper. They've been holding discussions with Jeremy Frimpong, the Bayer Leverkusen's right back. And if Maguire goes, they're going to need a centre-back as well. So for the first time, what feels like a long time, United are not going into a transfer window with a pressing need for a right winger. So logically, given that you've got a talent there who's only 20, who they've invested quite a lot of money in and has done very well at a big club where there are big expectations, who are still pushing for promotion through the playoffs, as you said, it's logical to just use him as the guy to come in. And if he's not quite up to it next season, then you make a decision in January or the following summer as to whether he goes out on loan and has more fulfilling playing time, or he's sold. I think United can be quite relaxed about that. But logically, it just makes sense to eliminate a problem there. You bring him in, and you've got 2 left-footed right wingers for next season, and they do need to refine their attack, because you just look at the lack of goals this season, and they're on 49 in the Premier League at the moment, which is the number they ended on in Louis van Gaal's second season, where the football was just so stultifying, between Juan Mata scoring a penalty against Wolfsburg in late September to Jesse Lingard's header against Stoke in early February. There was not a goal scored at the scoreboard end, which is the end United traditionally attack in the first half of games. And there was this mad sequence, I think, of 12 home games running, and the scoreline at halftime in all but one was 0-0, and the other one was 0-1 to Norwich. So United need to be in a better place next season than they are currently with their attack, because certain players, their numbers are up. Other players, they have the potential. I think having Garnacho and Ahmad as the two backups to come on in games for Rashford or Antony is a pretty good way of going about it, because both of them have high ceilings. Garnacho's had a really good season. Ahmad has had a really good season, albeit at a lower level. But they've shown that they can be quite destructive players, especially with their playing styles as well. They're very direct, they're very quick. Ahmad's good for a goal. Garnacho's scored a few decent goals this season. If you then supplement the attack with a striker, which however they do it, whoever it is, they are going to get a striker this summer. And if you've got a midfielder as well who is more dynamic, is more durable than Eriksen, and can certainly ease the creative burden on Fernandes, who is just indefatigable. It's remarkable how many games he's played this season, his performance level as well. I think it's arguably been his best season in terms of performances. Then you're in a better place than this season, where there are just too many flaky players. Sancho, Martial. Then you've got just a body in Weghorst, who his 2 goals have literally been tap-ins with the goalkeeper line on the ground. So they need to get into that point where, and I'm sure they have been anyway, because as I said, as I wrote earlier this week, in terms of preparing for Ahmad to come back to the squad, he's got a cup final suit in his measurements, because United want him to feel involved coming back into the squad, being part of that day. He's obviously not going to play any part, but they want him to be present, and I suppose that's the start of his reintegration into the squad, and he will be able to do that whether or not Sunderland gets to the playoff final. So I don't think it's just idealism saying, bring him back into the squad and use him to be Antony's competitor. I just think it's the logical thing to do. I think it would be the realistic thing to do as well. But I suppose the cautionary tale is James Garner, who was brilliant last season for Forest, and I think everybody expected him to be in the United squad this season. But in the end, because he was one of the one real sellable asset in that squad, as he hadn't played for United in their dismal season last season, in the end they decided he had to be sold to as part of the cost cutting measurements. Really, I know it sounds strange because they spent so much on Antony and Casemiro in August, but with the profitability and the sustainability rules, they have to get players out every now and then, and unfortunately for Garner, he was elected as that sellable asset.
That is all for part 2 of the Manchester is Red podcast. We'll be back after the break for a little brief talk of the takeover and a look ahead to the Wolves game. Welcome back to the Manchester is Red podcast. Samuel, I think it's now 172 days since the Glazers said they were conducting a strategic review of Manchester United, or in other words, looking to sell the club or seek investment. We're still not at a position where we know who exactly is going to own the club or which direction they're going to go in, which seems incredible, really. I mean, I've written previously that a source close to the Glazers had said back in November that they thought it would come down to Qatar and Ratcliffe. Ratcliffe had spoken to them already. There's been Qatar interest in United for at least a decade. They're in a position they expected to be in. We still don't know what's going to happen. It's getting very close now to the point where it's arguably interfering with the transfer window. I mean, it might not change the budget much, but I'm sure whoever owned the club, it would have an effect on what could be spent, even on wages and things like that. I mean, there is no good reason really that it's being dragged on now. It's just turned into a charade, basically, hasn't it? That's been orchestrated by the Glazers and Rain.
I wouldn't disagree with that at all, and certainly when we asked Ten Hag about the situation last week, he admitted that he was still a little bit in the dark as to the funds that would be available for this summer, which is not a good position to be in when the transfer window opens in about a month's time. I've somewhat fortunately for me, after the FA Cup final, I'm off for 2 weeks, and already that feels like the slot where there will be an announcement or there'll be some clarification regarding the ownership of United. We were looking this week where it's obviously a dead week with no midweek match, that there's bound to be some takeover chatter coming up, and there hasn't been anything concrete. There have obviously been some stories from certain outlets, but it's not changed anything in essence, in that the Glazers are still the owners of United. They've not communicated whether they've accepted Sir Jim Ratcliffe's offer or the offer from Sheikh Hassim, and I suspect this will rumble on for the final weeks of the season, which puts United supporters in a similar situation to 2005, in the season ended with the FA Cup final and the club were about to be taken over by the Glazers. Maybe in this case they go into an FA Cup final and the Glazers' occupation is about to end, but we've discussed it before, and I wrote about it in early February, and it's been apparent as well that the two brothers, Joel and Avram, whose names are in the programme as co-chairmen, they are reluctant sellers, and it would certainly account for the time this is taking for them. And as you said, it has been a charade with these the third round of bidding and missed deadline, as if it's this auction, and in some ways it is really. And I think the two really interesting stories during the whole process were both from Mark Kleinman, the Sky News business editor, and the first one was obviously that there was going to be an announcement that the Glazers were certainly open to selling United, and the second one, I think it came out last week, was about this buyout clause that Ratcliffe had inserted that meant that the Glazers would be gone by 2026, which is a pretty, if it's, I don't doubt the veracity of it, but it's an original way of going about placating a couple of brothers who might still want their dividends or might still want to be invested in United for a few more years, and then they've no choice but to go. And at that point they've had 21 years of siphoning off the club, and surely time's up at that point. And Ratcliffe, it seems like it's, from his perspective, quite a smart compromise, in that the prospect of Ratcliffe taking over United and not being the main man always seemed quite fanciful, because whatever his business ventures have been, he's always been front and centre of it in sport. He's been the man champion in Ben Ainsley and the America's Cup. He's the one who's been on the podium with Lewis Hamilton for F1 events, because obviously he's got a friendship with Hamilton, and of course he's been around the pitch at Nice, etc., etc. So it always, as I said, it always seemed remote that he would not want to be the main man, and there's an element of the self-publicist about him as well. He would have known when he visited Old Trafford, and then when he actually walked onto the forecourt overlooking, in between the Trinity statue and the Sir Matt Busby statue, that there would be photographers there, and he wasn't shy of seeing them. And of course, you've got the big neon sign, Manchester United, behind you. You've got Sir Matt Busby behind you. You've got a photographer in front of you. The background couldn't be better, really. And of course, it was the money shot from those meetings with Sheikh Hassim. There are seemingly only two verifiable pictures of him, and people. There's clearly a split among the United fan base. Primarily online United fans who've never been to Manchester, who are mostly invested in transfers and are not necessarily supporters who have invested a lot of their own money into the club in terms of going to games or going to the Megastore or or what have you, they favour Qatar because it's the shallow choice, in my opinion. With Ratcliffe, although there are cons with him and there are certainly issues there. I mean, he says that he's a lifelong United fan, yet he had a season ticket at Chelsea. I don't think it would have, a man with his billions, it wouldn't have been too difficult for him to buy a season ticket at United and to get a helicopter up to Manchester every other weekend. So people are going to take a dim view of that, and I'm sure if he is to become United's owner, there'll have to be a point where he communicates with supporters, and that might be a question that's asked of him because they want to know what his true intentions are, and they will want reassurance. They'll want reassurance from whoever the owner is. So it just, it keeps going on and on and on. It's like United with their goalkeepers kicking the can down the road, and that's what the Glazers seem to be doing with the Qataris and with Ratcliffe. But it's previously, when I was when I was speaking to people close to Ratcliffe, there was some guidance. Recently, there's been radio silence, so people can read into that what they will.
Yeah, and Ratcliffe has arguably been shrewd in a way if he thinks cutting the Glazers in some sense is going to get him ownership. But the idea that he would also pay however many billion for United and leave Joel and Avram with any meaningful say, like you say, I think is pretty unlikely. If Ratcliffe buys the club, even if there's a Glazer shareholding in the background, I think it's pretty clear it will be Ratcliffe's club and Ratcliffe's decisions. And you mentioned.
Sorry, with that is also particularly relevant because although Joel Glazer is this absentee landlord, effectively, who's not stepped foot into Manchester for 4 years, you speak to people, well-placed sources, and they say he is involved on a daily basis with the run of the club. He certainly was with Woodward. He must have daily dialogue with Richard Arnold as well. United are operating subtly but also very differently under Arnold from Woodward, and for the better as well. I think Arnold has overseen that strategy in a much more what's the word? He's not trying to spin as many plates as Woodward was, and Woodward should have taken a step back from certain matters. Arnold, I mean, he came out with the pub talk in Cheshire last year. He said, "You're the football director, you're the manager, you go and get your players." He's the chief exec. He just wants to sign it off. Whereas Woodward, of course, it was flying off to Spain to try and sign Neymar. It was meeting Mourinho in a hotel in London. It was leaving Australia on urgent transfer business to sign Cesc Fabregas, and obviously never signed Cesc Fabregas. So even some of the real lowlights, it's easy to forget because there were so many. So that would be an important difference in that. Although there's this possibility of them or a couple of the siblings still staying on and still their names being on the board of directors, you would imagine that Ratcliffe would be the one delegating to the power brokers at Old Trafford as to what's the best way forward.
Absolutely. There is a game this weekend, of course. We've touched on it already, but Wolves at Old Trafford. A Saturday 3 p.m. for United. 2 Saturday 3 p.m.s in a row now. I mean, what are you expecting from Wolves? We've already said that these fixtures have a history of being boring, basically. It's probably the easiest way of putting it. And I guess we're probably getting down that route again. I mean, would you make... Well, obviously, we're recording this before Erik ten Hag's press conference, so we've not had his updates on team news or anything like that. But in terms of the team selection, what sort of team would you go for, and what are you expecting from the game?
I'm probably expecting another tight United home win that shouldn't be tight. I would be more than happy to be proven wrong. That, as I said, I think we've even games where they've won, you've come away from it thinking that was a missed opportunity. The Everton game, the amount of chances they had in that first half, and they should have made lighter work of it, but they don't. and Wolves are just not that type of team. And I think United are pretty much, in terms of winning well or winning comfortably, they are dependent on Wolves' mentality, in that do Wolves go into this game with the mindset of, we're playing Man United, we want to show what we can do, we want to continue having a decent end to the season. I mean, it was only 2 weeks ago they were absolutely pummeled 6-0 at Brighton, but they recovered from that quite impressively to beat Villa at home last week. And Lopetegui said it's one of his biggest achievements staying up as well, which I think is a bit of a stretch for a guy who's managed Real Madrid and the Spain national team and actually won the Europa League with Sevilla as well. But it's been cutthroat stuff down at the bottom of the Premier League this season, and Wolves, by and large, they have underachieved. But you still, I think people at the start of the season, I think James Robson was saying to us, because his father's a Wolves fan, he was worried about Wolves, and he wasn't, his reservations weren't entirely misplaced there. But you still look at Wolves' team, and there's still such a big Portuguese contingent, and they're not quite as imposing a team as they were under Nuno Espirito Santo, but they have still got good players. And I suppose someone like Ruben Neves, he's possibly looking at the fixture and thinking, well, if I turn up, then maybe who's to say I won't get that inevitable or that much awaited big move in the summer. It was interesting what Declan Rice said to TalkSport after getting man of the match against United last week, how he wanted to impress United, and he effectively handed in a transfer request at West Ham at the World Cup, and he said he wants to play in the Champions League and reach the top, and he's not going to do that at West Ham. So there were still players of that mindset. It's as cliched as it sounds, but I do expect United to win. They've had the midweek break. They have had 2 bad results last week that mean they absolutely have to win this game, and they can open up a bit of breathing space against Liverpool, especially as Liverpool play on the Monday night as well. So it does put a little bit of pressure on Liverpool, and Liverpool are going to Leicester, who absolutely need the points. I think it was probably the best result United have had over the last week or so, was that Leicester got thrashed by Fulham 5-3, which I don't think that scoreline was necessarily reflective of Fulham's dominance, and that means that this is such a huge game for Leicester that Leicester have got to really be at it against Liverpool. And you saw what James Maddison said about them as well. So it's interesting times at Leicester, and it's really do or die for them. So they can't take their eye off the ball whatsoever in that game against Liverpool. But if United don't win this game, then you'd be tempted to install Liverpool as favourites to get top 4 ahead of them, because if United can't beat Wolves at home, then there are going to be question marks over whether they can win their remaining 3 games. So it's a test of, there are character defects in this United squad. Everybody is aware of them, but how deep these character defects go, I think we'll only know that over the next few weeks.
Absolutely, and that's not the only big game involving a United team this weekend. Another trip to Wembley for Manchester United. The women's team in the FA Cup final against Chelsea on Sunday. Same 2 teams going for the league title as well. United top of the WSL at the moment. Chelsea with 2 games in hand, I think it is. Chelsea have got the brilliant Sam Kerr as well, who has won the Football Writers Women's Footballer of the Year this morning. Some guy called Haaland edged the men's award. Samuel, I mean, we'll touch on it. The women's team are having a fantastic season, aren't they? And feels like Chelsea are coming for them where the league title is concerned. But the fact that they're in the FA Cup final against Chelsea, they're going toe-to-toe with Chelsea for the league title. And we've seen how Chelsea reached in the semi-finals of the Champions League. I think they lost to Barcelona in the semi-finals of the Champions League. It suggests that the women's side of things at United is going in the right direction, and their certainties to at least be in the Champions League next season.
Which is good news in terms of Alicia Russo's situation, where they're trying to get her tied down on a new contract, and she's the main woman in that team in terms of goal scoring. She's the starting striker, but it's impressive the way they've gone about it. I mean, the women's team only started, what was it, 5 years ago, wasn't it? That announcement came, and the first season was 2018-19. They got promoted, and in that time they've had to change manager. Casey Stoney stepped down after 3 years, and there were certainly issues with the facilities at the club, and they've recruited really well as well. I mean, there was still some ever-presence that was signed in that first summer. I think Millie Turner, Katie Zellum, pretty sure Ella Toon as well moved across at that point. They've flirted with the odd superstar signings with the two American additions a few years ago, but that seemed more experimental. And they're contributing immensely to women's football in this country. I mean, Ella Toon's goal in the women's Euros final last season was one of the highlights, and so was Alicia Russo's back heel at Bramall Lane, I think it was, in one of the earlier rounds. So they've done United proud there, and the commitment to the women's team can be seen at Carrington at the moment. There's a lot of building work going on at Carrington, so much so the car park is out of bounds today, and we're going to be ferried up on a minibus. So I'm looking forward to seeing who the driver is. Maybe it'll be John Murter or one of the reserves who aren't getting as much playing time. It would be interesting to see who the designated Carrington bus driver is. Well, I mean, that was probably the most use you can get out of Phil Jones these days, if indeed he's still a visitor at Carrington. But there's building works going on there in front of the academy building, which is due to be a building reserved for the women's team as well, which is overdue. They need that, and it's only right that United, I mean, there's a lot of commitment to invest and to improve Carrington, and it's not quite as run down as we all thought. Some of us have had a peek behind the curtain this season, and it's actually more impressive than we all thought. But it's good to see, even though it comes at the cost of a car parking space, it is good to see that they are actually investing in the long-term future of the men's team and the women's team.
Definitely. That is all for today's Manchester is Red podcast. Samuel, thank you for being here. Otherwise, there wouldn't have been a podcast. And thanks for your time.
Thank you for being here, Ty, as well. Yeah, exactly. I'm sorry I didn't let you get a word in edgeways, but I'm sure these two-handers on these in-person two-handers on tour will be a lot more conversational.
Yes, definitely. And make sure you subscribe to our YouTube page now for more content. We've got bonus podcasts after press conferences available on all the podcast platforms as well. And we'll be back with the next episode of the Manchester is Red podcast on Monday.